Hi, this is a video about Infinity, the tabletop miniatures game by Spanish company Corvus Belli. It's a really excellent game and it has a number of features that distinguish it from other war games. One of these are the rules about measurement and movement, and since the rules are a bit unusual, this video sets out to clarify and explain them. What's unusual is that players are required to declare their intentions for units based on estimates of the distance involved. That means you can't measure to find out how far away something is before you make all the decisions about it. And in the case of movement, that means we have to specify our intentions for an exact route and a precise intended destination. It's only after actions have been properly described that players can use a measuring tape to find out how these intentions eventuated, and perhaps even whether they were possible at all. So, as I said earlier, this is one of the mechanisms that makes Infinity different to other games. In this case, players are having to make estimates for best outcomes, and they're either rewarded or punished for the quality of their judgment. Making the distance estimates applies to all aspects of the game where line of fire or zone of control are involved. So that means movement, shooting, hacking, and ARO skills like change facing skill or the distance involved in a dodge. So everything fits together really nicely and it makes sense as a whole, but it is quite unusual to have to estimate distances like this in a game. So it seems when players come from other tabletop games, and especially if they've got a lot of experience playing those games, there can be some confusion about whether this is really what they have to do, whether they really have to estimate distances. Well, that's what it says in the rulebook and on the wiki, and it's been clarified pretty thoroughly in the forums now. So I'll provide some links for those later on, and the rest of this video is going to show some simple examples for how you can actually manage it in your own games. Okay, let's start with the simplest possible situation, and we're going to see that even here there are a couple of implications of the movement and measuring rules. I'm going to be using this model, and it has a 4-4 movement attribute. That means it can move 4 inches in the first short order movement skill and another 4 inches if it uses the second short order skill. There are two parts of the rulebook that we're particularly interested in here. One is the order expenditure sequence, and the other is the details on moving and measuring. So we follow the order expenditure sequence, which is on page 31, and we read the blue pullout on page 61 for details of how we make the measurements and movements. Okay, here's the sequence of events. 1 is activation. I'm going to activate this unit. 2, order expenditure. I'm going to put a counter by the unit to indicate that I've spent an order on activating him. Number 3 is declaration of the first skill. We're going to make a short order movement. So now we skip to page 61 and we read moving and measuring pullout. It says you can measure immediately after declaring the move and before determining where the trooper ends his movement, and the sequence of events would be move declaration, clarifying the direction and the intention of the trooper's final location, measuring, and declaration of the real movement's ending point. What does this mean? Well, if we can't measure until after we've clarified the direction and the final location, then we can't use the tape measure to help us decide how to move. First of all, we can't do this kind of thing. We can't put the tape measure down and move the dude along the length and decide where to drop it. And the second thing we can't do is we can't put the tape measure down and decide which is the most favourable position. So in this situation, I'd at least have to say, I'm going to move this unit here to the back corner there. Or I'm going to move this unit here to the front corner here before I use the tape measure. And then I could use the tape measure to find out that in the first case, I do make it to the back corner, and in the second case, I don't. Now that sounds like it might be a bit tricky to manage in a real game, but there's a big red pullout on page 31 underneath the order expenditure sequence that says, important. All details and choices related to the execution of a short skill, short movement skill, or entire order skill must be specified when it is declared. For instance, if you declare a movement, specify the entire route. And there it is. There's really no question that the rules require us to be specific and unambiguous about our model movement, and before we're allowed to use the tape measure. In our little scenario here then, we could provide all the details and the choices, and we could specify the entire route and the destination by saying something like this. I'm going to move this unit in a straight line to the back corner here and get into base contact with the container. Then I could get out the tape measure, put the measure down, and I could see if that intended destination eventuates. We can see that that's well within 4 inches, and it does. Or I'm going to move this unit in a straight line, staying in cover, get into base contact with the container, and then I'm going to move the unit up to the corner to try to get partial cover with respect to the unit there. Then we'd get out the tape measure and we'd see if the intended destination eventuates. Well, with just under 4 inches to that container, it's certainly not going to make the remaining distance to the corner. What happens in this second case? Well, in other games, a lot of issues with measuring and movement have to be managed by players relying on tacit courtesies and developing etiquettes in their local club. One of the things that's great about Infinity is that the rules themselves obviate the need for all that. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't play courteously with one another, of course. I'm saying that you don't have to hope your opponent is going to play with courtesy. You only have to be clear about what the rules are. And if both players understand they have to declare all the details and the choices and specify the entire route and the destination before they use a measuring tape, then many of the misunderstandings that spoil other games just go away. In this situation, it's very simply that the model moves as far as it can along its intended path and then stops short. And we know exactly how far short it stops by virtue of having specified that entire path. Because we did that, both players can know exactly what happens when the estimates don't work out as planned. And what we see here is, while the model doesn't make it to the corner and doesn't have line of fire or partial cover, the opponent doesn't have line of fire either. This is what I meant earlier about obviating the need for special courtesies. If we declare all the details and choices for an order and we specify the entire route and destination of a model's movement, then so many of the usual difficulties are already taken care of. That said, there is a case for developing an etiquette. It's when situations become more complex, so we'll look at that as an optional style of play in the final part of the video. I'm going to demonstrate this in the simplest possible situation, where it really isn't necessary because neither player really cares about the outcome. But the point is to demonstrate the method clearly, so I can show how this style of play provides a way to negotiate those clutch situations where big mod swings might be at issue and both players will care about the outcomes. Now, if I put a counter underneath the model, when I declare the route and the intended destination, I can put another counter down where I want the model to finish. And when I get the measuring tape out, I can measure between these two fixed points and see that the second position is too far away. So I can work my way back down the tape measure, put down a second token, and both players can see that my movement was absolutely fair, and then we just clean up the counters afterwards and we're ready for the next step. Now let's look at the other situation, which is that we might undershoot when we make our estimate. Let's suppose we place the marker here. Now when we get the tape measure out, we're going to see that we could have moved a whole extra inch, but we've declared that final position where it is. So in this case, there's no need to add that extra counter. We can just place the piece right there where we said we wanted it to go. Clean up the counters again, and you're ready for the next step. In this sort of situation, it's likely that both players are going to care about whether the active player can make it to cover and shoot in one order, or whether he's going to have to spend 2 orders to achieve the same sort of thing. And this really makes the most of the counters method. I'm going to move into full cover here. I hope that I'm staying out of your line of sight. I'm going to move up to partial cover here to try to gain line of sight. Then when we put the tape measure down, we can see, okay, 3.5 inches to the first position. Let's measure another ½ inch there. It's absolutely clear to both players whether line of fire was ever obtained and whether partial cover is obtained for a second short order. So again, this method with the counters isn't specified in the rules. We're not required to use it. It's an etiquette. It's a methodology that's been developed by some of the more experienced players to help them play the rules more easily. I hope it's useful to you too, and I hope you enjoy your games.